Well, if you want further evidence of how out of control the sexual revolution is and how harmful it is to children, look no further than our Prime Minister. Anthony Albanese has shortlisted a graphic sex guidebook aimed at children for the Prime Minister's Literary Awards. I kid you not.
Welcome to Sex, a book sold at Big W and marketed towards your children. And it says so on the very first page, whether you're an apprehensive 11-year-old. Size matters, talking about penis size.
Well, according to my next guest, Yumi Stein's graphic sex ed book for kids as young as 8 teaches about porn, sexting and other unsafe sex acts. Joining me to discuss what no one in civil society should ever have to discuss when it comes to children is Stephanie Bastiaan, Head of Advocacy at Women's Forum Australia. Stephanie, thanks so much for your time. Yumi Stein has labelled you and others right-wing fascists for trying to have welcome to sex withdrawn from sale to children. Who is Yumi Stein, and why do those from the radical left of politics want to sexualise children?
Well, good evening, Lyle, and thank you for having me on your show. Yumi Stein is a radical who is trying to push her gender ideology and her bad ideas onto children. Her book is not suitable for children. In fact, it teaches many dangerous things, illegal things, such as how to safely sext. Kids can't send nude pictures of each other and hold these pictures. It is an offence. She teaches about pornography. At the end of the day, we have a big problem with the way that this is being promoted and marketed, and the fact that this has now received a government award or is been shortlisted for a government award is a testament to just how far these institutions have been taken over by radicals like Yumi Stein's. It's deeply concerning. This book is not appropriate for children at all, and in fact, many adults wouldn't want to read it.
What sort of message does Anthony Albanese then send to the mums and dads of Australia by shortlisting a book like this for the Prime Minister's Literary Award?
It's very concerning. This book actually should be it should be classified and removed. He is telling parents that this book is okay, that it's suitable, that kids should be learning about this stuff, when quite frankly it should be off the shelves. These are decisions that parents should be making. It should be out of public libraries, it should be out of schools, it should be nowhere near children. If parents want to pick it up and buy it for their children, I would question their judgment, but it's not for the government to go around and promote it as some sort of suitable literature for children.
Well, we've seen, Stephanie, this week, Anthony Albanese say that he's going to introduce similar laws to that which has been flagged by the South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas to protect children from social media, to create or basically to ban children from accessing social media sites. Malinauskas is saying from the age of 14, Albanese hasn't yet set an age limit. But on one hand, he's shortlisting a book like Yumi Stein's sex book, then on the other hand, trying to pretend that he's protecting children from social media. There's quite a disconnect going on here, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I think parents, by and large, are responsible for their children. We have to be careful in the way that we restrict things, but at the same time, we do have a problem with social media and what kids are accessing. I think it's a double standard, however, because there's been no mention of targeting all the freely available porn sites. There's no move. They've acknowledged in their domestic violence report that porn contributes to attitudes towards women. And so it just seems that this is a backhanded way that they're bringing in government control, perhaps using these new online ID laws. It's not the right way to handle it. At the end of the day, government should be staying out of things unless it's harmful to society. And we know that porn, for example, is harmful to society. So their efforts should be going at restricting children's access to this adult content, whether it's online or in books like Yumi Stein's Guide to Sex.
Yeah. Look, I might disagree with you there a little bit about the social media restrictions. I've heard Jonathan Haidt, who wrote the book The Anxious Generation. He thinks if we all as a society work together to say to kids, hey, you can't access social media at a certain age. That's a way of protecting kids. But that's a big debate, and one which I'm sure we're going to have more of in the weeks and months ahead. I want to move on to something else, Stephanie. Jasmine Sussex, who appeared on ADH TV earlier in the week with my fellow ADH TV host Chris Smith. She's a Victorian breastfeeding expert, but she's been taken to the Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal for speaking out about the fact that only females can breastfeed babies. What's wrong with that?
The man that's taking her to court is an activist. He has promoted this idea that men can breastfeed since 2019 when his wife was pregnant with their son. He is very unhappy with the fact that she is speaking the truth, essentially. He is offended by the fact that men cannot breastfeed, and even his own experience of breastfeeding failed, and they ended up moving on to feeding the baby with the bottle. I think it's really scary that we're now living in a society that there is a genuine case that she has to go and attend to in court for speaking biological fact. Yep. You can pump men with drugs as much as you like, and they might produce some form of liquid, but there is no evidence that it is safe, that it is nutritious. And the fact that she is being dragged through the courts over speaking as a specialist in a field is a real concern.
Yeah, well, that's right. What is this liquid that a biological male is trying to secrete and then feed to a baby?
There's actually a lack of testing on this, and there was one doctor who said that perhaps issues around transphobia has actually stopped this being investigated further. The only studies that are available are single studies. These appear in pro-LGBTI literature. They usually involve the testimonies of one person and their experience. But there's no long-term, there's no evidence, there's no studies on what this liquid is, and whether also other drugs that they're taking to transition all the rest of it are coming through. We know that there are certain drugs that women cannot take. They can't drink alcohol. They're told to restrict their coffee intake when they're breastfeeding. It's extremely sensitive as to what women consume in order to protect their babies, and somehow we're going to pump men full of drugs and say that it's safe for them to chest feed to validate their feelings of wanting to be a woman. It's absolutely insane, and I think it's a huge breach of trust in the healthcare system.
It sure is. It's an absolute disgrace, and I know you're a mum, and my wife has breastfed our 4 children. It's a beautiful thing. This just seems like such a desecration of motherhood, all in the name of LGBTIQA plus politics. Why is it that a Queensland a Victorian woman in Jasmine Sussex is being taken to a court in Queensland? I mean, how crazy are our laws that allow this, and how crazy are our politicians that they allow this to happen to their fellow Australians?
It is highly unusual because she is a Victorian woman and the case is in Queensland. But this actually went through the Queensland Human Rights Commission prior to it being put to court. They're the ones that have sent it to the QCAT. So I think the fact that our government's allowing this to go on, you think back to the 2013 changes to the Sex Discrimination Act, and all the other pieces of legislation have changed since gender identity has been put into legislation as a protected attribute. And it's women, it's mothers who are being prosecuted under these changes. The law is being weaponised against women by men. There are no cases of men being dragged to court because women want the rules to change for them to facilitate them in some way. Yeah, it's really unfair.
It sure is. Speaking of more bad laws coming down the track, in Western Australia, the Parliament this week is debating the so-called gender self-ID laws, which we've seen passed in Queensland and I think Victoria as well. There's also a bill here in New South Wales. Here's the courageous Liberal Upper House MP Nick Goiran fighting the good fight in the Parliament this week.
Bill that for the first time in Western Australia will see people being able to change the sex on their birth certificate of any age. That's what we're dealing with here.
Stephanie, how dangerous are these laws to girls and women?
Well, they're very dangerous because essentially men can now change their birth certificate and identify into women's spaces, sports, services, domestic violence shelters, it's removed another barrier to allow them to do that. Nick Goran and his colleagues, some of his colleagues, put up a really good fight, but this government rammed the legislation through. Even last night, they moved an urgency motion to stifle debate further. It seems that they know that the public are not on board with this. There's been thousands of signatures to MPs asking them not to support this legislation, and rather than listen to their constituents, they're just pushing it through. But it just seems to be that every Labor government at a state level across this country are ramming these laws through. It's very disappointing, and it needs to change.
It sure is, Stephanie. And you're right, it's generally Labor governments that are doing this. But why are the Liberals so silent? And why is there no public campaign? I think mainstream Australia would be with Conservative politicians if they'd only fight. Nick's an exception. There's a couple of exceptions in the federal parliament, but the parties themselves, the leaders, don't put up a fight. And the public are generally unaware that this is going through.
Yeah, well, I think in WA, Libby Mettam has come out quite strong. She's also taken a strong position on puberty blockers in wake of the Cass review. She's the first Liberal leader to do so. I think there is a weakness by and large. It's very concerning, but there are other MPs such as Claire Chandler who are really putting up the fight. And I think hopefully with more public pressure and more political involvement by people outside, we can start to try and get some changes. We desperately need it because it's really affecting women and girls. It's having huge effects. And we've come across so many people now who just feel politically homeless, who are looking for leadership in this area because it's having wide ramifications everywhere.
Yeah, it sure is. No, and you're right about Libby Mettam. Let's hope other political leaders on the Conservative side will take a leaf out of her book. Stephanie, we really appreciate the work that you and Women's Forum Australia are doing in this space. I think you're right. We've just got to keep advocating and shining a spotlight on this. And I think mainstream Australia will be with us. Thanks so much for your time today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Lyle.